I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of natural forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I did not have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there is a massive national park. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All of that being said, it's a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, two of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the National Forest. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintball at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all of the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with. It was getting pretty late. We decided to keep on looking, so we drive for about half an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kinda odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we did not want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label. I see that it's a bottle of some home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out there. And none of us thought that it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than a half an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we were eating, we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles did not make any sense. It did not seem to be a bright light, and it was not moving. It was kind of like the glow that you see over a bright city We could not see the light source itself, though. Since there was no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I would not have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunk. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we were almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit!" A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We look at each other and decide that maybe we don't need to see what the light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlights and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying a paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we could not see our campsite very well. At this point, we had probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and did not want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, we had a few more rum and cokes. We asked him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They are locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I asked. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess. But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said he had been in the tents since we left, and that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us were way too drunk to drive, but we decided to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150 and start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car and try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of our truck tires, but it did not. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects the light off of it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps its pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it to the back of the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I did not get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I have driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again, though. My grandparents live on a small farm in rural America. Though the farm itself is quite small, we own much of the surrounding land, and so I spend a lot of my summers cutting apart down trees and burying roadkill from the roads that border the property. I'm not a particularly small girl. I'm 5'9", and even though I'm on the slender side, I can quite easily move a killed deer or chop a tree to pieces. Much of my grandparents' property is deep woods. It's not connected to a major road or even a service path, and is only bordered by other farms. There are two exceptions to this: how the small north-south running main road where the house sits, and the side road, which is an out-of-service fire road used by firemen to access the mountains behind us in case of a fire. As far as I know, no one lives up there, and the only time we ever use it is because it's a semi-clear, cropless, and floraless path that winds from the far westish side of the main road to the barn, and is so convenient to drag down trees along when we are taking them to be chopped for firewood. You can barely see the house from the side road, and the only real way to see it is to be in the barn itself. My grandparents stopped working every day around 6 p.m. to start preparing dinner, and I usually help. But one summer day, a few years ago, we had a thunderstorm the previous day, and more were on the way. So we were determined to move all the downed trees back to the trunk pile. It was around 7, so still bright out. But as it was late summer, it was beginning to get on the dimmer side, and I knew I did not have a lot of time to finish up my chores and get back to the house. I was finally old enough that I was allowed to use my grandparents' chainsaw to take apart the trees on my own. Before, I had been limited to dragging the branches and to splitting the trunks with an axe, but I relished the privilege of, sawing things into pieces. My grandfather had been working with me earlier that day to take apart trees, though, so I hadn't been using it all that much because he was much more quick and efficient with it. So to recap, my grandfather and my grandmother are in the house. It's late afternoon. Not a soul is in sight, and I'm alone on a semi-abandoned road, probably 100 pounds of trees back to the barn. As I was pulling the main trunk of the tree along the dirt road, I had the neck-pickling feeling that you sometimes get in the woods, that there's another human or animal around. Now, our property's woods line up pretty well with other farms' woods, and those farmers had kids around my age, so it wasn't unheard of to see them trampling around in our woods, especially during hunting season. But as I said before, it was summer, which is nowhere near deer season, or any other animal season. As a matter of fact, I had seen coyotes and the occasional bear in the woods, which is why we frequently carried firearms if moving around at night, but bears aren't usually out during the day, and coyotes were usually weary of coming near our land anytime, even to the close day. Alan asked me where he was and whose land this was, and cheerfully offered to help me stack up the rest of the logs and pull a tarp over them so that the rain did not bother them. As we talked, I, being friendly and quiet, relieved to be done with my work for the day, chatted about my grandparents and our land, and mentioned that they were both in the house making dinner, and that I'd have to head back soon. if I wanted to get home before dark. He seemed quite sad about that and said that he was lost and needed to get pointed back towards the trail. And I was more than happy to show him the way back since I no longer had my load. He had saved my ass by returning the chainsaw, and because my personal paths through the woods are quite twisty. My grandfather came up beside me and looked at me with a funny look on his face and asked me why I did not remember that he had brought the chainsaw back to the barn with him, instructing me to finish carrying the logs back before rain came. He told me that since there had been flash floods the night before and were scheduled for the upcoming night, that no park ranger of the local park would have let hikers into the area because of how unsafe it was. We turned to look at the place that Alan had been, and the duffel bag and chainsaw, both of which had been left behind. Upon inspection, the chainsaw was indeed not ours. It was the same brand, but far older, and the reddish flakes around the blades were definitely not sawdust. I prayed at the time that it was animal blood, since I do know some people who use chainsaws to take apart dead, rotting deer before burial or to make them more easily salvageable by local animals. But in light of what was inside of his duffel bag, it seemed unlikely. There wasn't anything inside the duffel bag that you'd need for camping. Instead, inside his duffel bag was a trap, several trash bags rolled tightly together, duct tape, condoms, zip ties, and collapsible shovel. My grandfather took the duffel bag to the trash lot the next day, and we both decided that I would never be allowed out of sight of the house again without a rifle, and that we would never say a word of this to my over-anxious grandmother. So Alan, let's not meet again. This happened a couple of years ago, and it's time to get it off of my chest. I was around 18, and for a period of time I was very physically active. I had struggled with some bad habits brought by excessive partying, and excess proved very helpful in this regard. I regularly went jogging. Mind you, at the time I lived in a small town in the ever so peaceful Scandinavia. Out of all by myself jogging in the woods, not a soul in sight. My class didn't start until around noon, so I went out for a morning jog, broad daylight and everything. I went on my bike to the tracks, left my bike at the jogging station. As I am about to enter the tracks, there are two middle-aged men sitting by the cottage. I glanced at them only to find myself locking eyes with one of them. The way he looked at me was deeply unsettling. It was only for a moment, but I'll never forget how I felt when his eyes pierced right through me. My gut is making an honest effort trying to tell me that something is off about this whole situation. These men are wearing jeans and leather jackets, of course they are. They sure aren't here for the sake of exercise, but I brush it off thinking I'm overreacting. I was wrong. I had only been jogging for a couple of minutes when I suddenly feel like turning around, and there they are, in a white minivan, following me on the tracks. I feel that the man's devilish eyes are on me again. I'm doing my best trying to think of a logical, non-threatening reason for them to follow me. Can't really think of one that makes sense, so I'm trying to work out what on earth I'm going to do. I don't want to make it obvious that I'm downright terrified. If I start running as fast as I can, I'm turning myself into prey. No one else is here. No one. It won't matter how loud I scream. Fortunately, I've been on these tracks a number of times, so I know there is going to be a sharp curve not so far away, so I try to act as if I'm not the least bothered by the whole situation. As soon as I pass the curve, I'm out of their vision for a short while. I sprint into the woods and hide behind a small rock. I'm crouching down as I see the white vehicle pass the sharp curve, so they're out of my sight, but I dare not move. I know that when they pass the curve and notice I'm nowhere to be seen, they'll know I've run off somewhere after the curve. The trail is in a straight line for quite some time. They'll know I'm not on the tracks anymore. So I stay put, thinking that if they are after me, they will come back. If I'm overreacting, they'll carry on doing whatever they are doing and I won't be seeing them again. But the white van came back. At this point, my memory is a bit vague. I don't even breathe, dreading the silentest movement will give me away. I can't fully remember if the van stopped and the dominant man went aside, or if they simply passed the curve again, very slowly looking for me. But I do vividly remember when the little van went back where it came from. I was somewhat relieved, though still a bit worried. Thing is, all tracks lead back to the cottage, where these men are likely to be. I then decide to carry on deeper into the wood, glancing over my shoulder every now and then to make sure no one is there. My sense of direction is somewhat okay when I'm in the forest, for some reason. I'm useless otherwise. Anyway, I know that there will be a highway if I just keep on going. I'm reaching the highway and make my way from there. It usually takes half an hour walking from where I lived to the tracks. This journey home took 3 to 4 hours. Totally worth it. But I can't remember if I ever went to pick up my bike. I do not know what the intentions these men had. I doubt they were good. And I do not know what was in that van. I should have called the police on you creeps.
Alright, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead, like, share, subscribe, share on Facebook, share on Twitter, share on Instagram. I don't give a shit where you share it, just share it. Thank you for watching.